Are you ready?
Oh, yeah!
From parts unknown and into your home, this is the Groovy G Championship Belt Podcast. Now, here's your host, Groovy G.
Hello there, folks, and welcome to the Groovy G Championship Belt Podcast. On this episode, we talk with the Russian nightmare, Nikita Koloff. He's coming your way right now.
You're watching the Groovy G Championship Belt Podcast. For your official Groovy G Belt Podcast merchandise, check out www.groovyGshop.com.
Nikita Koloff, welcome to the Groovy G Championship Belt Podcast. How are you?
Well, Groovy G, I love it, man. I am groovy like you. It's just an honor to be here with you, and looking forward to speaking to you and all of your listeners and all around the world and all across Australia. Thank you for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. All right, let's start right back at the beginning. You were a high school football standout. You went to play college football alongside Joe Laurinaitis, who people listening to this podcast will probably know better as the Road Warrior, Animal. Now, Animal was the one who suggested you get into pro wrestling. What are your memories about that time?
Yeah, it's an interesting story in that I guess you might say the old expression that comes to mind is turnabout is fair play. And what I mean by that is I actually recruited Animal out of his high school to come play college football with me. So that's how we first met. I was a part of our recruiting team, and he was a standout high school football player himself. And so I still vividly remember the evening that him and his mom and his dad came and toured the campus, and I was the one that got to personally show them around. And we just had an instant connection. We became great friends, all really like brothers. Mom and dad kind of adopted me into the family as a prodigal son, if you will. And so we were able to play a few years of college football together. And then he ended up leaving college. And next thing I knew, he had got into professional wrestling. And of course, the Road Warriors had, as all the fans are aware of out there, had one of the best careers in my estimation of tag teams ever. And at one point after I graduated college, I was still training and I was training for a pro football tryout when Animal called me one morning and run the idea by me of shaving my head and becoming a Russian and tagging up with the Russian bear, Ivan Koloff. And so, after entertaining that idea for a few minutes, making a phone call to the promoter in Charlotte, North Carolina, named Jim Crockett, I made a decision to give it a try.
So was that Jim Crockett Sr. or Jim Crockett Jr. at that time?
It was Jim Crockett Jr. Jim Crockett Sr., I believe, maybe had passed away. Maybe, I should know, but maybe 3, 4, 5 years prior to that. So Jim Crockett Jr. had taken over the business along with his two brothers, David and Jackie, and his sister Frances.
So you made your pro wrestling debut for Jim Crockett Promotions in about 1984. You were the Russian nightmare, Nikita Koloff. Now, you teamed up with your uncle Ivan Koloff and the turncoat then, Don Canoodle. You were put in a very prominent position right from the start. That must have been a huge amount of pressure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, for those who are not familiar with my story, of course, we give some websites at the end if they want to read more about my story. But, because I came, Grant, from a background of football with no amateur wrestling background, no professional training, only a 5-minute phone call conversation with Jim Crockett prior to the day I showed up at his office. And he introduced me to Don Canoodle. In fact, I just talked to Don the other day. He just celebrated his 70th birthday. And he brought it up again. Every time I talked to him, he's like, I can't believe we just threw you in the ring like that with no experience. But, I like to say Nikita Koloff was born in the hallways of Charlotte, North Carolina, the day I showed up there. And we finished hours and hours of interviews, and Jim Crockett said, be in Raleigh, North Carolina tomorrow night. You're going to wrestle on television, having never been in a ring before. And so they showed me a couple basic things in the dressing room. I went out, had in front of a sold out crowd, had my debut, an 11-second victory. And then the next 2 or 3 months, Grant, was kind of what you might call on-the-job training, meaning Ivan, Don, and I would get to the towns 2-3 hours early, and they would fly all over the ring, teaching me the mechanics of wrestling. I'd have a short match. They'd have a world tag team title match. I'd sit in their corner. Ivan would sit in my corner. And then on the drive home every night, we would then talk about the psychology of wrestling. And lo and behold, the next thing you know, within, as you said, just a matter of months, I became a main event wrestler.
And that was the thing, because it was an industry dominated by tough guys. It was a very protective industry. It wasn't as open as what it is now. They must have seen something in you that thought, this guy can be trusted on the inner circle and can be trusted outside. And you went to a lot of great lengths to protect your image as a Russian. You didn't speak, and you spoke in a lot of Russian phrases as well too.
I did. Well, in fact, the first, and I determined this on my own. It wasn't like it wasn't like Jim Crockett said hey, I want you to do this, this, this. I understood the storyline, right? You're the nephew of legendary Ivan Koloff, the Russian Bear, and so for me, in my mind, I thought, okay, and part of the story is 1984. The Russians had boycotted the Olympic Games in Los Angeles, and so I was supposed to compete in those games. But because of the boycott, I made a decision to turn pro and become the protege of my uncle, move to America. So it's kind of like I'm just off the boat, so I don't speak any English. And so it was relatively easy at the beginning, because I literally made a decision. I wouldn't go talk to anyone anywhere except for the guys in the car that I was traveling with, Ivan and Don, and maybe occasionally another guy or two. And sparingly in the locker rooms. And in fact, some of the guys joke about that. They said they used to look at each other and go, hey, does he know we're like smart to the business? He doesn't, have to, he doesn't have to try to fool us, but I was determined to build that image, protect the character, protect the business of professional wrestling.
That was your idea to do that sort of stuff. It wasn't someone's direction to say, this is your character, you have to do it this way.
Correct. I just, in my mind, I thought, if I'm going to really, and anyone who knows me at any kind of a deeper level understands that if I'm going to do something, there's an expression right over here. I don't know about there in Australia, but all in. If I'm going to do something, I remember, Grant, back to when I first picked up a bodybuilding magazine at age 12, and I'm looking at these guys in the magazine. I was fascinated by the guy. You told me before this call, that you saw me in a magazine at the age of 4 or 5, and you basically said you were fascinated by what you saw. Well, that was me looking at this bodybuilding magazine. I was fascinated by these guys. And I remember saying at age 12, one day I'm going to look like one of those guys. And I embraced that, and I just dove in head first. I bought a little plastic weight set. I started lifting, exercising on my own in a garage with a dirt floor. When I started playing football, again, I said, I want to be one of the best, so I'm all in. When I got into wrestling, I said, okay, I don't want to just be a pro wrestler. I want to be one of the best of the best. And to do that, I determined I had to study some of the Russian language. Now, I don't in any way. I never spoke fluent Russian ever, but I put a few phrases together. I learned to sign my name in Russian. Heck, I legally changed my name to Nikita Koloff just to get that character over and to protect the image.
And that's dedication to the business as well too. You talk about the training, and we're talking about the 1980s here, and you had a big physique, which was probably enhanced, I guess, not just by training, but it was a lot of things that people in the 1980s, all professional sports players did, enhancing their image, enhancing their bodies, not just through training. Do you want to talk anything on that, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's in my book. I mean, I don't try to keep it a secret. I mean, back in those days, you're exactly right. I mean, my passion, my desire was to be a professional football player. Now, so I'm talking about American football.
Yeah.
That my passion, my desire was to be an American professional football player. And my understanding in college was, if you want to play at that level, here's what you have to do. And by that meaning, you were very kind in choosing your word, performance enhancing drugs, right?
Yes, well, I guess it's the edge that every athlete wants an edge these days. I guess like the UFC fighters these days go and train at altitude because it gives them the advantage of a low sort of oxygen level.
Right.
Some people will train in a pool and stuff like that. In the 80s, this was the new thing that was coming in to give you an edge. So
it was essentially it was, and I will say for the record, so straight up, so people understand. So yeah, so I because I want to play at that level, I was like, okay, well, if that's what you have to do to play at that level, then again, I'm all in. But let me just real quick just say, I feel fortunate that I really honestly do not, I never abused them. And by the way, I'm not an advocate of them. In other words, they can do harm, a lot of harm and damage to your body. And so I feel fortunate I didn't abuse them, but I did use them.
And I guess it's different now, because talking to you now, because you're still around with us, I guess, and you didn't weren't a tragedy, that it was an enhancement for that time, but then you would cycle in and out. Is that like a training mentality, or is that just good luck?
Yeah.
Or
yep,
what was it?
Was just I just I studied like I did everything else. Like I studied to be a Russian. I studied what I would consider to be the proper way to use them, and so when I broke into wrestling and the career launched the way it did, I realized once I'd established myself, I no longer needed them. And so it was early in my career that I got away from ever using them ever again, and just relied on my skills, my abilities, and what I learned in the ring from Ivan and Don and Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and several others.
And last question on steroids, and I won't come back, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. When you were professionally wrestling, were they more as an image enhancement rather than a skill or strength enhancement? Same as actors dye their hair, or actors might put on a costume. Taking steroids aren't going to make you stronger or faster. It's just going to add to the character.
Well, I guess I've got a twofold approach to answering that question, because there's no question that they enhanced my performance in college, and then certainly my image in the early days of wrestling. But again, they are performance enhancers, but there's also a real downside to them that they can, certainly cause, as others have testified to, or admitted to, create numerous health problems down the road, especially, if you abuse them. But even if you don't abuse them, there's that potential for that to happen. And so that to say, for me in wrestling at that point, it was more about the image than, oh, I want to bench press 550 pounds. I didn't really care about that. I just cared more about the projection of the image at that point, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. Let's get straight into the belts. You made your debut in 1984. It didn't take long before you, along with your uncle Ivan and fellow Minnesotan Crusher Khrushchev, you win the NWA World Six-Man Championship belts. Now, these are a 3 set of belts. They're made by Reggie Parks. Have you got any memories about those belts?
Yeah, well, Crockett had, there were belts that were, the big thing with Crockett, he had this 4-foot trophy, and I'm like, well, who's going to carry that around? I know I'm not, but, and so the trophy in Crockett's territory was more the centerpiece than the belts were at that time. But at the same time, it was fun to be the world's 6-man champions. And of course, we'd eventually beat Dusty Rhodes and Manny Fernandez for the world tag belts. And then we kind of took a page out of the Freebirds playbook in that we said, hey, because we're the world 6-man champions, we can determine when it comes to defending a world tag team belts, any 2 of the 3 of us can defend them. It doesn't just have to be Ivan and I, even though Ivan and I technically were the ones who beat Dusty Rhodes and Manny Fernandez.
And that's what I was going to ask you about next, because the NWA World Tag Team Championships, the different territories at that time, the NWA never sanctioned an official World Championship tag team belt, but the Crockett's were the NWA at that time, so the belts that they had were the belts. So they were those cast belts. They were made by a Ukrainian former pro wrestler called Alex Moklo, also known as Nikita Molkovich. They were cast in bronze. They were very heavy, apparently. Have you got any memories about those NWA tag team belts? With the ones with the Eagles.
I think they were great. In fact, the new organization with Billy Corrigan and Dave Lagana, I was asked last year if they were reintroducing the Crockett Cup Tag Team Tournament, and they were going to reintroduce the tag team, those belts, to the winners of the Crockett Cup. And I saw them, and it just brought back so many wonderful memories. Now, I kind of gave them a hard time. I said, hey, you got black leather behind these belts, man. It was brown leather. And they're like, no, it was black. I go, no, dude, the ones I wore around my waist, it was a dark brown leather. But the emblems and et cetera, the Eagles and that themselves, that, I mean, couldn't have been more perfect to what we wore in those days. They were heavy belts, but I felt like they had a great look to them. And because when it comes to pro wrestling, again, whether you're talking about the image of your body or the look of a belt, I mean, that's the draw, that's the attraction for a lot of people, and I thought they had a great look to them.
And you mentioned that Billy Corgan's new NWA now. The NWA tag team belts that they use are actually a cast off of Manny Fernandez, because those original tag team belts that you guys held, and same as like Don Canoodle and Rock and Roll Express, they all had the same belts, because there's only 2 belts that were actually made. Those big ones on the burgundy strap. The ones that have been reintroduced by the NWA, someone's taken a cast off of one of the ones that was held eventually by Manny Fernandez. Manny Fernandez and Rick Rude had the last ones of those ones. And Rick Rude's family still owns that physical belt themselves. Manny Fernandez let a couple of belt makers / collectors cast the copy. So the ones that are reintroduced now, they are a cast copy from Manny Fernandez's last one.
Okay.
but they're on a black leather strap. So it is the same belt, but it's a cast of a cast.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mean of course, obviously the original belt, but the original look to the belt. And yeah, I didn't realize Rick's family actually had those. That's fascinating that they do.
So the first titles you guys won as the Russians was the 6-man, and you brought in that Freebirds rule, and then you won the tag teams. We're going to jump forward a couple of years to 1986. You started a huge feud. It's that best of 7 series with Magnum TA, and he is the US heavyweight champion. We're talking about that NWA United States title belt. You eventually won it on that best of 7 series with a little bit of help from your family, I guess. What are your memories? What are your memories about the Great American Bash? What are your memories about the belt and that whole best of 7 series? It was huge.
Well, yeah, it was. I'll start first with the Great American Bash, the first ever Great American Bash against the Nature Boy Ric Flair, because just to back up a second on that, because talking about when you asked earlier in the interview about the launch of my career, it was no question a real fast track, because I went from my debut in Raleigh, from 11-second win in Raleigh, to becoming within 13 months the world 6-man champion, the world tag team champion, and to wrestle Ric Flair for the world heavyweight championship belt at that first Great American Bash. And that was only 13 months into the business from the day of my debut that I stepped into the ring against the Nature Boy in front of however many, 25, 30, 35,000 people for the world heavyweight title. Even though I didn't win it that night, it was an incredible honor to be a part of that history, a part of the first ever bash, and wrestling the Nature Boy. From there, I mean, we had about, I don't know, we had 4, 5, 6 months of matches. I mean, night after night after night, and in my pursuit of that belt, which eventually led to the angle with Magnum TA, because in the territory, they considered whoever was U.S. champion, to be the number one contender for the world heavyweight title match. And so the fact that Flair was able to elude me for all those months, then we transitioned into that angle with Magnum. And to date, it's still the most talked about series of matches from the wrestling fan when I'm out there doing legend autograph signings and, Comic-Cons and those sorts of things. It's still the number one most talked about angle or series, is the best of 7 series.
Absolutely. And was it because it was a Russian getting a United States belt, or was it because Magnum was such a good guy that people didn't want him to lose to an evil Russian? What was it?
Great question. It really, my answer that I would say a combination of both, in that, I was the epitome of evil, right? And then Terry Magnum had the all-American, good guy look to him, just had that look. He had the persona of carrying that belt, and then the idea or the thought of a Russian being the United States heavyweight champion. We kind of built it as though it would be a real insult to the American people, the fact that a Russian would be the U.S. champion. So it all kind of tied in together.
Do you have any memories about that physical belt itself? It had the eagle, it had the red, white, and blue stripes on the side.
Yeah, no. Again, all the belts I wore around my waist, I thought the belts that Crockett had, for its time, were perfect for that season and for that time, and the way we went about, into the whole angle from the signing, and the brawl at the signing with
his
Terry's
mom.
mom being there. Yeah. And little side note on that, some people have probably heard the story now, but Terry never smartened his mom up to that or to the business at all. So when people watch that clip of when he comes over the table and comes after me and we leave him laying, when they see her reaction, that's like a mom's reaction, like for real. She had no clue any of that was going to happen. So, you're watching her response like a real mom's response.
So let's talk about the belts. When you won a championship belt, whether it's the tag team or the 6-man or that US title, because you held that US title for a long time. Who kept it?
Yeah.
Did you take it after you won that? You go out the back. Do you keep it in your bag yourself? Do you take it to the airport? Do you take it out to the clubs afterwards? Because there's photos like in the wrestling magazines at that time. Moscow is going crazy because Nikita Koloff has won the US title. That's in the wrestling magazines. We know that that's sort of kayfabe, but it's still believable at that point in time. What happens with the physical belt once you win it? You go backstage, what happens?
Yeah, well, in those days, it was totally our responsibility to take it from town to town. And so, yeah, some guys appreciated that. Some guys didn't. So for some guys, it was like extra weight in their bag, and or going through an airport. Although we didn't fly as much initially the first couple of years until we launched into the Superstation TBS. We drove most places, so it wasn't a huge deal. You throw it in your bag, throw it in the trunk, walk into the arena. But it was our responsibility to take care of it and to hold on to it and make sure it got from town to town. Going through the airports once we started flying was pretty fun because obviously it wasn't as strict back then as it is now with TSA and all of that. But even now, when I take the belt I have sometimes with me on the road, it's fun to watch the expression of the guys looking at the TSA guys looking at the screen as the bag goes through the X-ray, because you could see them trying to read it. What's it say? And some of them will even ask questions. And some of them, are old school wrestling fans. So it just generates some conversation. And you might even say it gets me some favor getting through TSA sometimes.
Good, because I'm the champ.
Exactly. What are you champion of? And some don't know. They can't really fully, and you tell them, professional wrestling, what's your name? You usually tell them your name. And again, like some of them remember and some of them don't, but a lot of them do. A lot of them remember. A lot of fans out there, which I appreciate.
Did the boys ever take the belts out on the town, maybe to impress the girls? Like you had a big win one night, we're going out on the town, or was that just reserved for the horsemen?
Yeah, I think that was probably just the horseman's stick. That's not something I ever did. I wasn't into any of that, and in fact, for me, they used to give me a hard time because I'd go back to the hotel room and eat a can of tuna and go to bed. But I was more into the physique and the image and wrestling was more of a business mindset for me than it was, a tribute to my ego. So not something I did. I can't speak for the other guys, but it was certainly not something that I did.
Okay, let's get back to the belts then. Shortly after you won that US title, you had a match with Wahoo McDaniels. He had the NWA National Heavyweight title, and the two belts were merged. Do you have any memories on that?
Oh yeah. I mean, we were Crockett wanted to, just phase out. He kind of felt like both belt, to have the two belt, like, they were kind of one and the same, national belt, US belt. And so just to merge it under one banner as a US champion and Wahoo, I feel he was very gracious because he was legendary in his own right in terms of his career and for his willingness to, to put me over, and so very honored that he was willing to do that. Little side note for that belt, interesting side note. So when they merged them, I then had that belt in my possession,
The NWA national one.
the national belt, and I would probably still have it in my possession today had not somebody, like for real, break into my place and steal the belt out of my place. And that's all they took. I mean, I had money in the house. I had jewelry. I had stuff in the house. All they took was that belt. And to this day, I have no clue, really no proof of who it was, no clue, and have never seen it turned up. I don't know. You might know. I haven't seen it turn up anywhere, but somebody broke in and stole it.
After you unified them, they let you keep that belt. You walked out with 2 belts.
Well, again, it wasn't a top. It wasn't. There wasn't really any discussion. I won them both. I had it in my possession, and at that point, and I don't know what the time frame was. Like, I'm not gonna say. I can't say it was a year later, 6 months later. It wasn't long after I won them that somebody broke in and stole it. But that said, it wasn't like Crockett had his hand out going, "Hey, give me that belt back." He may have at one point, but at that point he didn't. So I had it in my home, and next thing I know, it's gone. I don't have it in my home.
We're going to fast forward next couple of years. Tragedy struck. There was talk that Dusty Rhodes was going to put the NWA world title belt on you, or maybe on Magnum TA, and they were going to try and resurface that best of 7 series, but Magnum had his car accident. What are your rememberings on that?
Yeah, Magnum clearly was being groomed to be the next world heavyweight champion, and certainly with the chemistry he and I had with each other, it's really pretty interesting to think about how different things could have turned out had he not had the accident. I mean, I don't know that I would have ever become a babyface, that I ever would have turned and become a good guy had he not had the accident. I don't know. Had he not had the accident, he would have been the world heavyweight champion at some point, and being the chemistry the two of us had with each other in the ring, I mean,
Would have been
it
huge.
it would have been, I think, a huge business for Jim Crockett, and Terry and I worked so well with each other. I mean, it was just fluid. It wasn't a struggle. It wasn't a challenge. Our personas and what we projected and portrayed would have been just a natural, to go down that path, and we could have, who knows? I mean, we could have had angles for years, back and forth.
And you mentioned before, then, if it wasn't for Magnum's accident, you wouldn't have turned face. And that's what, I guess, it was the silver lining. Dusty decided to turn you into a face. So it was now him, Dusty, and you against all comers. So the 4 horsemen, and you did that against Arn Anderson and J.J. Dillon, and eventually you won the Crockett Cup. Although the Crockett Cup wasn't a title belt, what are your memories about winning the Crockett Cup, and what happened with the actual cup itself?
Well, that whole transition there, as Dusty and I and Jimmy Crockett discussed the possibilities, I had to trust that Jimmy and Dusty, who at that point probably had 60, 70, 80 years of experience between the two of them in wrestling, that they knew more than I knew. Because honestly, at this point, I'm still only about just a little over 2 years in the business. So they're like, "Hey, we think it'll work." So it did. We did the turn, and for the next 2+ years, Dusty and I become the superpowers. and we wrestled predominantly against the Four Horsemen, although we wrestled against others. And so we just did sellout business wherever we went. And eventually in '87, we would win the Crockett Cup in Baltimore, and Magnum would make his first appearance back at a live show. And quite honestly, a very moving moment for the fans.
He was assisted as well too with the walking stick. He wasn't in a good shape.
Right.
But because he was such a powerhouse, and to see him then after so long, and then that's what he was still recovering as well too. I guess it was shocking.
Yeah, I was going to say, for the people who aren't aware of that whole story, I mean, when he had the car wreck and broke his neck, and I didn't believe it when Jimmy and Dusty, we were in Philadelphia when the first night they told, and I had just come back from a tour in Japan for Baba. And so I didn't hear about it over there, right? Communication then wasn't like it is now, right? By the nanosecond. I mean, you and I are communicating across continents, I'm on a cell phone, right? But and so I at first I didn't believe him. I'm like, yeah, right, wrestling's a work, right? Like, whatever, you're working me, and they're like, no, he was originally diagnosed to be paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of his life, lifted out of bed, etc. So for him to walk, even though he was still in recovery, almost a year later, for him to walk, be there it was a big deal. And we're good friends to this day. We still talk. We do things together. He does some ministry sometimes, some things with me currently. And so for him to be where he's at physically, even today, in a sense, I would say is, a miracle in itself. But to win the Crockett Cup, and you said, you asked where the cup was. And I don't know what. We didn't have to tote around in our trunk. So thank the Lord for that, because that was a big monstrosity of a cup, and Crockett basically kept possession of that after the Crockett Cup tournaments.
Did you pose for photos with it, or did anyone drink out of it, or did anyone try and have a drink out of it? Or
no, but there are photos of Dusty and I, holding the cup with the Road Warriors when they won it, Sting and Luger when they won it. So there are those photos floating around out there, and holding the $1 million check that I wish I could have, back in those days.
So you would have been unfortunate.
Yeah. So those photos are floating.
So what's the payday? You're holding $1 million check. Are you going to get what, $25,000? You're getting $5,000. You're getting $200. What's your payday on that days?
I truthfully, it wasn't $1 million. Like you said, we didn't split the check. And in those days, I had hired a manager that managed everything for me, and including my checks being sent directly from the office up to Tim, and he handled all that for me. So I actually didn't see a lot of what my actual paydays were. Now I would venture to say, that one was, probably, I don't know. I couldn't say for sure.
Well, you don't have to go into it if you don't want to.
Well, I'm just saying. I don't know the exact number, but what I can tell you is, Dusty and I didn't split the $1 million. I can tell you that much.
Well, it was the booger. He's not going to split it 50-50.
Yeah. Dusty got 98% of it, and I got 2%. That's probably about the truth of it too.
It probably is. Oh dear. All right, fast forward a little bit more in time. You lost the US title, but you won the World Television, the NWA World Television title. And then the Crockett's bought Bill Watts's UWF, and they had a unification match between the TV titles. The NWA TV title versus Terry Taylor, and the UWF TV title. You won that match. What happened after the match? What was the belts like?
Yeah, Starcade 87. And so, yeah, I dropped the US belt to Luger, who in those days, I held it for almost a year, and then Luger gives me a hard time. I think officially that particular belt he held, I think like three weeks longer than I did, or something like that. So he sometimes reminds me of that. But that said, so then I get the NWA World TV title belt. Terry and I have the match, the Starcade 87 unification. I win both belts there. I still have the UWF World TV belt in my possession. I occasionally travel with it and use it as as a kind of a visual aid, if you will, for my speaking and ministry work I do. But sometimes at the autograph signings as well, I'll bring it with me. I know people love getting pictures with belts, but I still have that one.
Because you got to keep that. You kept the belt. How did that come about? After the match, they give you two belts. You unify them. You go backstage. How do you put both? Do you put both belts in your bag and then they don't ask for it? How?
Yeah. I just throw the belts in my bag and again, I wasn't thinking a whole lot. I mean, again, nobody approached me and said, "Hey, give me the belt." So I fly home from Chicago and throw the belt in my closet and continue on as the NWA champion, and didn't at the time think a whole lot about it. Eventually, after I retired from wrestling, walked away from it, I then obviously remember I have the belt, and at that point thinking, well, it'll probably sit on a shelf in my office, and I can tell fish stories about how I won it and brag on it, and which I've not ever done that part of it. But yeah, they just never asked for it back. So like I kind of joke and say, so I kept it.
So you've still got it today. How do you display it?
It just travels in a bag with me. I had a friend made a special travel bag for it, and so I just, whether I'm on the road, it'll either sit in my trunk, depending on what I'm doing. Like I said, if I'm doing an autograph signing, I may bring it in with me, or if I'm speaking in a church or at a men's conference or something, I'll use it as a visual aid and bring it in with me. But I keep it in my possession. I don't leave it laying around, in a green room or anywhere else. It stays with me, or somebody's watching it for me.
Do you have a special spot for it at home where you keep it?
I just keep it in the bag. I don't have it
really
on display.
You don't display it?
No, I don't have it on display or anything. I just keep it in the bag.
And why is that? I've never won any of these wrestling belts. I've never competed to even win a wrestling belt. But I like to collect them because they're like trophies. I guess, I don't know, it's maybe like someone that collects Olympic gold medals. But you've actually won this belt. Although it's, everyone, it's predetermined, it's all entertainment. But you have won this physical belt. You don't show it off?
I don't, Grant. And it's like, it's not just belts. In college, I was, the irony is the Russian Nightmare was an academic All-American football player in college. And, so, I've won a number of different accolades over the years, whether it's been certificates or medals or titles or belts or whatever it is. And I guess honestly, for me, this is just me at this stage of life. I don't feel like I'm not trying to center the focus on me and that it's all about me. I honestly, that's not my focus. I feel grateful, fortunate, thankful to have had the the careers that I have had, whether it was in high school, college football, professional wrestling, and weightlifting, and the different things that I've accomplished. And so I'm very grateful for those things. But I just don't feel, and again, this is me, I just don't feel like it's something I need to, in a sense, if you want to say, brag about. Now, if somebody brings up, asks a question, or I'm on an interview like that, or, I'm out and about and we have a conversation, I mean, I'll talk about it. I'm not, but I'm not going to, I'm just not going to be braggadocious about it. And that's nothing against anybody else that has a display cabinet in their office or anything else. Kudos to them. That's just my personal approach.
Oh, yeah. And I can completely understand that.
Yeah, and of course, all the fans. It's not like I haven't had people, "Hey, what memorabilia do you have? We'd like to buy this, that, the other from you." But here again, I don't, like, I just recently had that asked this past week, and they want me to do some Facebook Live things and bring memorabilia on and put it up for sale. But I'm like, you know what? It's whatever I might have, the Russian chain or whatever I still have in my possession, my singlets and stuff, they're going to remain in the attic. And if my children or grandchildren decide, they want to do something with them one day, then kudos to them, but not, I'm not going to do that. So,
No, and I think deservedly so. Okay, let's talk about the big one. We'll talk about the one, I don't know if it's the one that got away or the one that you should have been holding, the big gold belt, the NWA World's Championship belt. Now, that belt was completely different from all the other belts. The one that Ric Flair had, it was made by a silversmith. Crumrine made that. Have you got any memories about that belt? There's photos of you holding that belt. I'm guessing it was a dusty finish somewhere on one of the Great American Bashes somewhere, or possibly a pay-per-view somewhere that you've ended up with it. The big one.
Yeah, there were different, Flair and I had, of course, we had angles of me as a heel, initially working against him, and then later on as a babyface with him as one of the horsemen and working against him. And there were times where, there were plenty of matches that I defeated Flair, but it would either be through disqualification or a non-title match, or those sorts of instances. So there were times when, just as, if you want to say, part of the finish, or I would just, even though I didn't officially win the belt, I'd leave the ring with the belt, again, just to further the angle. And take it back to the dressing room, and that's where there would have been pictures with those belts and with that belt and those sorts of things. I don't know what percentage what category I would fall into, Grant, but I'm probably one of the few guys who turned that belt down.
Really?
So it was, for those who follow my career, they know that I had a wife die of cancer, and I actually took a sabbatical from wrestling. I actually walked away from wrestling to take care of her in the latter stages of her life, the last few months of her life. And she was 24 when it was found. She was 26 when she passed. But I walked away from the business. I'm on top of the business. I told them I'd be back, but I just said, hey, I have to do this. I have to go. And so I went from main event wrestling Ric Flair for the world heavyweight title and everyone else, to taking care of her. The whole horseman superpower thing. Well,
because you were a good guy. There was talk that you were going to wear that NWA. You were going to be the champ.
Yes, and
did they tell you that you were going to be the champ?
Well, here, so the actual details of the story is this.
Sorry.
So Mandy passes away, and within about a week or two, not long. At that point, Rick he was the booker. Rick had the book, and he had the belt. And I vividly remember driving down to his house in Charlotte, 2 different occasions, and with the identical conversation. That he invited me down, and he said, "Hey, they want you back. Of course, they want you back. You're a main event guy, and we've had some anger." He goes, and he offered me the world heavyweight. If I'd come back right then, he'd offer me he'd put the belt on me. He had it. He was the champ, and he was the booker. And he said, "I'll put the belt on you." And I go, "Man, I just said, honestly, Grant, I go, I don't know that I'm ready mentally. I mean, I've barely gone into this grieving process." So anyway, I said, let me give it some thought. We'll come back together again. So when we came back together again, he goes, "Hey, we really want you back. We want it, and I go, okay. And I gave him some ridiculous stipulations. Like, man, they're not going to go for that. And I go, well, if they want me back, that's the stipulations. And I knew they wouldn't go for it, but all that to say, I can honestly say I was offered it and turned it down. I said, "Thank you, Rick, but no, thank you."
And why did you turn it down? Was it because of family commitments? Was it because it didn't mean as much as somebody else, or you didn't have the heart in it that somebody else that held it would have given it the prestige it deserved? Or
I think the main reason was just me mentally being ready to go back in, because I understood in those days, Grant, there was a lot of responsibility on that belt, and for whoever wore that belt. I mean, Rick had to go all over the planet. I mean, from the Northwest and up to Oregon, down to wrestle the Von Erichs in Texas, to Baba in Japan, and I mean, it was a grueling schedule. In fact, Ronnie Garvin, who actually ended up winning that belt at one point, if you were to ever interview him, I feel confident to say as prestigious as it is to say, "Hey, I'm the world heavyweight champion," and then to lug that belt around, because again, it's your responsibility to tote it around. Ronnie has been known to say he hated that whole experience, and in fact, there are guys in Legendary in the past, the Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, who at certain points, because of how grueling in those days the schedule was, they were like, "Man, somebody else can have this belt," So there was a lot of responsibility that came with it. And I know many people, even the fans, and a lot of them are saying, Crockett should have put it on me at that first American Bash in '86, or excuse me, '85.
Yeah.
So there are different times he probably could have done that and would have been blockbuster business for him. Maybe he just didn't feel I was ready at that point. But at the particular time you and I are talking about right now, it wasn't so much that they weren't ready as much as really I just wasn't ready. And again, when I got into wrestling, in my mind, it wasn't about the fanfare, the ooh, I'm a professional wrestler. It was, I treated it as a business from day one, which is, so when I made a decision under my own terms, even to walk away, I didn't have to give it second thought, even to turn down a world heavyweight title, can I look back and go, yeah, it would have been kind of fun to have it. So I could say, hey, I had them all. Yeah. Even it was for a few months, but at the same time, I'm not losing sleep because I didn't have it.
That's sort of what I'm getting to. You leave professional wrestling. You're at the height of your career. You've probably still in your prime. You've left because Mandy, your first wife, was diagnosed and eventually succumbed to Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Mm-hmm.
You left for a bit, and then you came back and worked for Vern Gagne for a little bit in the AWA, and then you come back to what's now WCW. But then you were fighting for that US title again, but then a match with Vader sort of put things to an end.
Yeah, and the thing with Vern with AWA, really Crockett and Vern were doing some co-promotion, and so yeah, it wasn't so much. I wasn't technically working. I was still really working with the NWA and WCW, even when I was doing stuff with the AWA, because of their agreement and co-promotion in working against the WWF. And so I agreed to, go in and have some title matches against Larry Zbyszko and some TV matches, etc., just to try to help Vern out on some of his own shows,
Because they were at the end of their sort of tenure, weren't they? They were.
Yeah, they were.
And you were still a big star.
Yeah. Yeah, so I could be a name for them to help maybe still try to draw, kind of the last hope kind of thing. And that's a whole nother story. But, Vern just wasn't willing to change with the times, and he just let too much of his top talent slip away, just get away from him. And so I was just coming in trying to help him out, I guess you'd say in his last ditch effort to hold on to what he had. But then come back, so yeah, I made the decision to come back to WCW, make the run against Luger and Sting, and then eventually, as you said, matches against Vader, which there wasn't so much any real angles going on as much as they were just kind of throwing matches together and thought that, Vader and I would be a good matchup. And
who was booking at that time? Was it Jim Herd then, or?
Jim Herd was a big – well, if you want to call it that, yeah. Jim Herd was a big part of it at that point. But they brought Bill Watson at one point. So Bill was there for a while. They were just trying anything and everything.
Because the reason I'm talking about that is you're one of, if not the only – one of the NWA/WCW superstars that didn't join the WWF or WWE. Why was that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought at one point I think it was just Sting and I, but for the
Sting's
as far
joined
as
there. Rock and Roll Express is probably the only ones. Well, they're in the Hall of Fame now, but.
Yeah, and they've done some things for him or whatever, but yeah, not many. But to answer your question, when Barry Darsow decided to go up there as Demolition, he felt his run. He felt that opportunity was bigger than being Crusher Khrushchev, right? And he had asked me about going with him, and I just said, Barry, I worked so hard on my character that I don't really want to at this point become someone else, even just for a bigger payday, and just really out of respect for the Road Warriors and my friendship with Joe, I just didn't want to become Demolition, kind of a spinoff of the Road Warriors. I felt right. Yeah. And as far as that goes. And people ask me the question all the time, well, did WWF ever approach you? Didn't they come after you? The whole Nikita Hulk Hogan thing, the whole deal. Well, the answer is no. They did. Either I missed the voicemail, I missed the phone call, but no, we never connected. I never pursued them. They never pursued me. I met Vince one time in a gym in in Las Vegas, had a cordial conversation with him but nothing about business, just a cordial conversation. And the rest of that story is this. Again, if anyone knows me, they'll know that I'm a very loyal guy. I like to consider myself, I'm sometimes loyal to a fault, right? But I'm a very loyal guy. I felt a loyalty to Jim Crockett Promotions, having given me the opportunity. I mean, think about it. He gave me an opportunity of a lifetime with no background in wrestling, with no training, with no connection, as you talked about earlier, into an inside circle and the opportunity of a lifetime to have this career that I had, that I feel so fortunate to have had. And so I just felt a real loyalty to the NWA that I honestly still have to this day. And yes, I probably could have went up there, probably could have made a phone call, probably could have made 10 times, 100 times, the money I made in professional wrestling. But for me, it wasn't just about the money. It was more important to me about the loyalty to the NWA and Jim Crockett for giving me my break. Even though, he sold it at one point, but I just still had a loyalty to the NWA.
And I guess that's probably an endearing thing that NWA fans have about you and your character as well, too. Do you think that Vince didn't want you because he already had a Russian in Nikolai Volkov?
I don't know. I mean, certainly Nikolai and I could have tagged up and been a tag team, or him. But
you would have thought that Nikolai getting his nephew Nikita coming in, that might have worked again, just like it did with Uncle Ivan bringing Nikita in.
Yeah, we could, or we could have formed a 6-man with the Sheik. I mean, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know Vince well enough to be able to say what he was thinking or not thinking, or why he's never had an interest of any kind. I mean, people have even said they should have brought you in to be, Rusev's manager. That would have made sense. I mean, there's a lot of things that potentially could have been done. Because for whatever reason, he's never had an interest.
There was a character in WCW that very much mirrored your own character. I'm talking about Bill Goldberg. He was the big guy. He came in, didn't speak much, took over, squash matches. Did you see any reflection of your own character, Nikita Koloff, in Goldberg?
So my understanding is that Terry Taylor trained him, and that Terry used footage of my matches to show him what that persona, and it was uncanny to me to see some pictures in the magazines and the resemblance, and then to see some clips of matches and a very close resemblance to my character. I took it. They say imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, and I that's what I kind of feel Bill's run in wrestling was like in a sense. And my leaving, my decision to walk away, again, just like when Magnum had his accident, it left a void and an opportunity to team with Dusty. My departure then, in a sense, left a void, left an opportunity for someone else. And lo and behold, Bill Goldberg pops up on the scene not long after I depart and carries if you want to say, very similar persona to the Russian Nightmare.
Absolutely. Well, Nature Boy Ric Flair wasn't the first Nature Boy, so I guess it's
correct.
It's an honor, I guess. All right, let's wrap this up. What are your thoughts on professional wrestling today?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic. And what I mean by that is, it's different from what it was in my day. I mean, in my day, as I mentioned, it was about mechanics and psychology. And in today's world, taking nothing away from the athletes themselves, and it was more about storylines back then. I think they really struggle with storylines today, and especially now having all these writers who write matches and write interviews. And people have to understand, if you watched an interview in those days and you see the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, the Tower of Power, too sweet to be sour, teaming with the super power Nikita Koloff, if you will, the son of a plumber from Austin, Texas, baby, whose belly is a little bigger than maybe it should be, and whose hiney is a little smaller than maybe it should be. When you see an interview like that, that's not scripted. That's not written. That's improvising, spontaneous interviewing. And same with my interviews. I mean, nobody's writing interviews for us. We're if you want to say, we're interviewing from the heart, if you want to say. And same with our matches. Now, the outcomes, yes, the outcomes were predetermined, but if I'm wrestling Ric Flair for an hour, 55 minutes of that match is improv. It's spontaneous. It's going into a ring and using psychology to tell a story to that fan sitting in the audience. And so the whole art of the business is much, much different in today's world as it was compared to back then in the golden era. And so, again, kudos to all the athletes and the success that Vince McMahon has had and now Cody Rhodes with the AEW. And I love what Billy Corgan and Lagana are doing with the NWA Power and kind of the studio. I was there last year and for reintroducing the World TV title belt. And it was just fun to walk into that studio, and it just brought back so many floods of memories of when I wrestled in the studio. And I love their approach. It's different from the big $1 million a week productions that the other guys are doing. And I think it gives the fans a great alternative. And so, so I'm just glad there's some different organizations out there. I think competition is good, and it's especially good for the fans.
What do you think about the title belts that they use these days? The WWE, they're the big ones. They've got the big W on their title belt, and they've got different color leather straps, but all the belts are basically the same. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I would summarize it by saying this. In my view, it's just my view. I don't think it really matters much what's on the belts anymore. By that, what I mean by that is, I don't know. I think the belts mean more to guys like yourself and the fans out there who collect them than the actual wrestlers who wear them. Meaning, a belt will change hands in one night, in 1 hour. I mean, I had the U.S. belt for almost a year. I had the World TV belt for a long, long time. This is just me. I feel like there was more meaning to the belts when they were held. I mean, Bruno Sammartino held the belt for 7 or 8 years when Ivan Koloff beat him in the Madison Square Garden. That was a big deal. I mean, it was almost a riot in Madison Square Garden. So I think the belts meant something more than just what they look like. There was more meaning to someone who was the champion versus how quickly they change hands now. And so, throw them over their shoulder or toss them into the ring. I mean, there was a sense of pride to have that thing strapped around your waist and to walk out into the ring as champion. And so my view is, that's kind of how I would summarize that. I don't think the belts mean a whole lot anymore. That's just my observation.
Now, you talked about before, like with your interactions and your friendship with the Road Warriors. Are wrestlers today, I guess, wrestlers in the past, the people were characters that became wrestlers, and the wrestling persona was part of their character. They were characters as people. Now you have athletes who can do moonsaults, flips, whatever, trying to portray a character that they're not. Is that some of the heart that's missing?
Yeah, for a while there, it seemed like too they were just spitting them out of a mold. In other words, almost like every guy looked exactly the same.
And they do the exact same moves. Like,
yes,
I don't want to point anyone out, but like John Cena was the best that they had out of the camp. Same as Brock Lesnar and same as Randy Orton. Everyone else is just like a carbon copy of those guys.
Yeah, and I think that's why they struggle are struggling. I feel like they're struggling to,
Because people don't buy into it. I don't think people buy into it because it's not a person that's a character being themselves. They're someone trying to be an athlete and a character and an actor and following lines. And I don't know. Maybe that's just a wrestling mark's point of view.
Well, and I think you're spot on. And again, you know, Dusty Rhodes wasn't you wouldn't find him in a bodybuilding magazine. I mean, you know, he was the son of a plumber from right? And he, you know, he joked like when I was just doing that kind of mock interview about, you know, his belly's a little bigger than it probably should be, and his hiney's a little smaller than it probably needs. You know, right? You know, when you had a Cowboy Ron Bass or a Black Bart, right? You had personalities who really kind of had their heart in it. And it was kind of developed their own personality as part of their character. That I think you're spot on. And I'll say this as well. I did a tour across Canada 2-3 years ago with a lot of young guys, and I was very humbled by the fact that they came, especially the first few nights. They came to me, every one of them. They're like, "Hey, did you watch my match? Do you have any pointers? Anything you could, you know, could share with me?" You know, and so I did. I started taking notes every night and watching their matches and offer ideas. But what I said to them, I go, "I'll share some things with you, but I don't know how much you're going to listen, because I go, I watch your match. You go out there and do 50 moves in a matter of 60 seconds, and my brain can hardly compute what you just did." And I go, "But I'll share with you some of my old school psychology, and you might be surprised at how well it works, but here you go." And some of them, to their credit, went out and actually implemented a few of the things I suggested, and came back afterwards, goes, "Oh my gosh, the fans loved it." I go, "Yeah, because that's what many of them grew up on." Or, you know, so like you're saying, these moon saws, and nothing taking nothing away. I'm pretty impressive
great
moves,
athletes.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it is. But they're just like you said. It's just the same moves and matches, match after match after match after match. So it's like there's no real character development to it, right? So unfortunately,
you had your character sort of given to you. What about the characters today? Because what I see of pro wrestlers today, a lot of them are they want to emulate Ric Flair. They want to be the rich guy that everyone hates. They have a lot of I don't know, a lot of wealth. They're all popular with women. That was hated in the 80s, though, wasn't it? Everyone was into working class heroes. That's why Dusty was a hero in the 80s. Someone with wealth, someone that had women conquest and affairs and stuff in the 80s. That was the bad guys, but now that's sort of flipped.
Yeah. So, well, right, because the objective, I think, back then was characters that people could actually identify with. Hey, I can identify with the son of a plumber. I'm a plumber. I can identify with the son of a plumber, and who's not flipping off backwards off the top rope. You know, who's just out there, just kind of fighting for his life, or, you know,
fighting for his family.
Fighting for his family, man. Yeah.
When you were their Russian Nightmare, because they gave you that character, were there other characters that they thought maybe you could be this guy, or maybe you could be this guy? Because this is, I don't know, this is probably before the WWF and Vince started doing like the bad cop, the Native American, the dumpster, all of those types of characters, made it cartoony characters.
Yeah, I think, you know, my view of that is, and that's what kind of separated the NWA, the WCW at one point from WWF was, you know, they even kind of, the moniker was, we wrestle. I remember when we first went to Philadelphia into WWF territory, and I'll never forget, I was wrestling Ric Flair. We wrestled for, I think, 45, 50 minutes that first night. And the fan was conditioned to a 15-minute ring introduction, a 5-minute match, and a 15-minute exit from the ring. You hear what I'm saying? And more about the show than the actual match and athletic and the ability of the story in the ring. And so Rick and I heard almost the entire night. The people of Philadelphia were chanting boring the whole night because they weren't used to an actual match. You know, I mean, a 50-minute match, a 45-minute match. But eventually, it took about 6 months. Eventually, as he and I and others conditioned them to understand our brand of wrestling, 6 months later, Rick and I had the fans standing on their feet for an hour, and there wasn't one chant of boring because we helped them understand our brand, and then they loved it. I mean, they ate it up, right? And
absolutely. And I guess that's what happened when Steve Austin came to the WWF, because he was an NWA wrestler. He wore the black trunks, black boots. He had no special entrance, but he was just
blonde hair.
Yep,
blonde hair.
He was just a bad MF. He just worked hard and fought hard, and eventually got turned into a badass that everyone got behind.
Yeah, it's interesting
because it was different. His character wasn't a character. His character was an NWA wrestler.
Well, and keep in mind, again, in those days that there was what they call, I mean, a baby face was a good guy who looked like a good guy and was a good guy. And that's what people fell in love with. They sympathized with the Rock and Roll Express were little guys who people didn't give them a prayer or a chance to beat the big bad Russians. But in putting the straps on them, putting the belts on them, kind of, giving them, moving them to another level, gave, again, the common man or the little man or others hope that, now I can identify with, they were able to do it. And so the approach was it's just completely different. So when he goes up there, shaves his head, he's no longer Stunning Steve. He's now Stone Cold Steve. And yeah, like you said, starts flipping people off, guzzling beer and stuff. It's also, there's almost like a flip where the good guy now becomes the bad guy, and the bad guy now becomes the good guy.
Yep.
And then everything's blurred at one point. You're like, I can't tell who's a good guy and who's a bad guy.
I don't think they've ever recovered from that.
No, I don't either.
No, The Rock was a bad guy that was so bad at being bad that became good. Undertaker was a bad guy. Everyone that they want to be a good guy, they boo, and the bad guys, they cheer. All right, let's bring this home. So you've got 3 books. You have your own ministry, your own website. If people want to know more about Nikita Koloff and their ministry, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, they. Certainly, of course, we'll start with social media. If they want to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, it is Nikita Koloff with the number 1 behind it. That's the real me. If they want to follow me on Facebook, the real me is look for a picture. Kind of an interesting story for another time. The details for another time, but look for a picture of me and 2 other guys standing in a river. That's actually the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, and I and another friend of ours standing in the Jordan River in Israel. That's my Facebook. That's the real me on Facebook. And so they can follow me that way on social media. If they want to read more about my story, NikitaKoloff.com, they can go there. And they can learn more about the ministry. Lex Luger and I do a lot of ministry. We actually do a camp for men together now called Man Camp. And then the books, I've got 3. I've got a brand new one in the workings, but I'm also revising the last one, which is my life story called Nikita, A Tale of the Ring and Redemption. I've actually written about 4 or 5 new chapters, so we're adding new stories, adding new pictures to that book, hoping to have that out very, 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 very soon. They can still get the first edition and read about my whole life story, or like I said, they can just go on the internet and read it about it there. And And so, yeah, just traveling around the world. Like I said, I just quickly mentioned, Lex Luger and I do a lot of ministry, a lot of things together. And there is a camp that him and I host in America, in North Carolina, called Man Camp. And if you want to post or let people know, the website for that is just mancamp.info, where men can get more information on that. Who knows? Maybe one day we could bring that camp to Australia. We'll see. I hope one day to get down under and maybe get to meet you face to face one day, Groovy G.
It'd be a pleasure. Nikita Koloff, thank you so much for joining us on the Groovy G Championship Belt podcast.
Hey, it was a pleasure. And to all the fans out there, you know what? Thank you for being so loyal and such great fans, and stay safe and stay healthy in these weird, bizarre, crazy times. And I just appreciate you having me on, man. God bless all of you out there. And I look forward to one day, hopefully getting to meet you face to face.
You're watching the Groovy G Championship Belt Podcast. For your official Groovy G Belt Podcast merchandise, check out www.groovyGshop.com.
Now let's take a sneak peek at what's coming your way on the next Groovy G Championship Belt podcast.
On the next episode of the Groovy G Championship Belt Podcast.
Well, we just spoke with the man that unified the UWF and NWA television titles, so I think it's only fitting that we have a closer look at one. On the next episode of the Groovy G Championship Belt podcast, we'll be taking a closer look at a Reggie Parks-made NWA World Television title. Until then, make sure you don't miss a thing by subscribing to this YouTube channel, and you can join in the conversation on Twitter at Groovy G Belt Show or on Facebook. Until then, take care. It's bye for now.